I came home from a year in the desert expecting silence, dust on the porch, and my wife's oak tree waiting for me in the same quiet corner of the yard. And instead I pulled into my driveway and saw 3 glass and stucco palaces staring back like they'd grown out of my grief overnight. I'm Ethan Cole, Army Logistics, 3rd generation on this land, and the last time I'd stood under that oak tree, I was scattering Lena's ashes into the roots while my grandfather Arthur Cole gripped my shoulder and told me, "No one gets to take what we bled for." Now there were strangers drinking lattes on balconies built over her grave. A white luxury SUV rolled up, and out stepped Madeline Kerr, president of the Silver Ridge Estates HOA and self-crowned real estate queen. Perfect blonde bob, nails like polished knives, smile bright enough to sell fire insurance to a man whose house was already burning. "Ethan, welcome back," she chirped, like I was the new guy, not the owner whose name was on a deed older than half the neighborhood. She handed me a stack of papers full of words like abandonment, pest hazard, emergency abatement. Somewhere in that legal soup was a $23,000 lien for clearing debris, which was their polite way of describing bulldozing Lena's wildflower memorial garden. My 79-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, met me at the fence line, hands shaking around a thermos of coffee. "I tried, dear," she said, eyes wet. "I kept mowing, kept sending letters, but they held meetings at 2 on Tuesdays, said you'd been unreachable." Apparently, while I was dodging mortars, Madeline had been running stealth HOA meetings, sending notices to an old address, rewriting rules so any poorly maintained property could be declared abandoned, then reclaimed for the good of Silver Ridge Estates. That first night, I didn't sleep. I walked my old property line with a flashlight, boots sinking into soil where Lena's garden used to bloom, and everywhere I turned, those houses loomed over me, decks and driveways crossing a boundary my grandfather had walked 100 times. The next morning, I marched into Madeline's home office, her converted garage that smelled like cheap perfume and expensive toner, and she smiled like she'd been expecting me. "Relax, Ethan," she said, sliding notarized documents across a folding table. "Your property value tripled. You should be thanking the Silver Ridge Property Council." That was the moment the metallic taste hit my tongue, the one I remembered from deployment right before a supply convoy went sideways. Falsified notices, backdated signatures, permits stamped by one inspector over and over. Same name on everything. Owen Kerr, county inspector, and, surprise, Madeline's brother-in-law. When the cease and desist letter arrived from her pet attorney, Graham Delaney, accusing me of trespassing on HOA common areas by walking my own damn fence line, I realized I wasn't dealing with petty HOA drama. This was an organized operation. So I did what we do in the military when supplies go missing. I audited the inventory. The county records office smelled like dust and apathy, but after hours of squinting at microfilm and digital scans, the pieces snapped together. Every single mansion sale had been brokered through Kerr's Signature Realty, Madeline's firm. Commission totals, 400+ grand straight to her pocket. Building permits showed property lines adjusted, setbacks ignored, environmental studies waived. All magically approved by Inspector Owen Kerr, and stamped on my grandfather's original purchase file for Silver Ridge Estates Lot 17, 2.3 acres, bought in 1952 with GI Bill money, under a federal veteran settlement program. I hired an independent surveyor from 2 counties over, a guy Madeline couldn't bully. His measuring wheel clacked across my grass like a metronome counting down to judgment. The report landed in my hands like a bomb. 0.66 acres of my land under those mansions. Foundations, porches, septic systems, driveways. The market value of structures sitting on my property alone? $2.8 million. That night, word spread. Mrs. Briggs showed me spiral notebooks where she'd tracked every shady meeting and whispered conversation for months. Rick Dawson, a retired contractor, confessed he'd questioned the property line during construction, but Summit Landworks, the grading company owned by Madeline's cousin Trent Harlow, had told him to shut up or lose his job. The young dad from Mansion Number 2, Jason Reed, knocked on my door with eyes like a man whose world was about to crack. His title company had called. There were issues with the land. I spread the survey on my table, pointed at the line that ran straight through his daughter's bedroom. "You're not my enemy," I told him. But you're raising your kids on top of my wife's grave. And that's when Madeline decided to weaponize my service against me. The emergency HOA meeting looked less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a show trial. Folding chairs filled with the wealthy side of Silver Ridge Estates, the ones who loved Madeline's firm but fair enforcement, free cookies at the back, the smell of industrial carpet cleaner and judgment. She sat at the front like a general, flanked by Graham Delaney, her $600 an hour legal warhead. Before we address Ethan's confusion, she began, voice dripping concern. I want to remind everyone he's just returned from a high-stress combat zone. We're all worried about his mental stability. Whisper Ripple. Neighbors I'd helped fix fences and jumpstart cars stared at their laps. Then came the vote. $500 a day in fines for unauthorized survey activity, an immediate assessment for her legal fees, and a promise to inform the VA that I needed psychiatric evaluation for community safety. It was a good strategy, if you don't mind being evil. Make the veteran look unstable, bleed him with fines, push him to sell. Except she underestimated one thing, my grandfather. My new attorney, Dana Price, met me at a greasy spoon off the highway, spreading my old deed out between plates of eggs and coffee mugs. She pointed to a faded line of text near the bottom and actually laughed. Ethan, your grandfather was a genius, she said. Buried in that 1952 document. No permanent structures within 75 feet of the northern boundary. Not a suggestion. A prohibitive easement with automatic penalties. $2,000 per day, per violation, retroactive from the start of construction. 18 months. 3 houses. Dana did the math. $3.2 million and counting. That was strike 1. Strike 2 came from the basement flood that nearly broke me. A mysterious main break drowned my workshop, soaked old photographs and half my paper evidence. While hauling ruined boxes, I shoved aside Arthur's old workbench and found a green steel footlocker, the one he'd shown me once as a kid. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, was a packet labeled in his blocky handwriting. For Ethan, property emergency only. The papers inside changed everything. The land had been granted under a special federal covenant for veterans, language that sounded dry until you read the clause at the bottom. Any unauthorized development triggered immediate federal intervention and required repayment of current market value, including all improvements. My 2.3 acres plus 3 luxury homes, over $4 million, and a handwritten note from Arthur. If anyone ever comes for our ground, remember, federal law beats local bullies. Use it. Make me proud. Then came strike 3, the thin blue line on the original survey I'd never noticed. An underground stream cutting diagonally under my property, a protected waterway that, by the time Dr. Claire Rivers, an environmental engineer, finished explaining it over coffee, I realized ran directly under all 3 mansions. No federal permits, no impact studies, nothing. Environmental violations started at $50,000 per day, per structure. While I stacked federal cards on the table, Madeline escalated her dirty war. My mailbox got crushed by an HOA landscaping truck by accident. Anonymous complaints about my mental health hit the VA. My basement flooded again. Someone dumped chemicals in Lena's koi pond, killing every fish she'd named during chemo. Local Facebook groups lit up with posts about the unstable vet with PTSD, complete with my service photo. The hardware store lost my account. The diner's system crashed every time I walked in. Through it all, Mrs. Briggs kept watching. One afternoon, she pressed a cheap digital recorder into my hand. They forget old people here just fine, she said. On the recording, Madeline's voice was ice cold. She bragged to Owen about burying original surveys, about doing this to another Korean War vet and a widow in a different neighborhood, about making troublemakers disappear under legal bills until they sold cheap. That recording landed on Dana's desk, then in the inbox of an investigative reporter named Nina Alvarez, who'd been digging into HOA abuses statewide. Nina connected Madeline to National Advanced HOA Strategies seminars, code for learning how to squeeze distressed owners out of their homes. Meanwhile, Jason Reed secretly recorded Madeline offering him free property management if he backed her story that I was dangerous. The more we documented, the more desperate she became. My cameras were spray-painted during a bogus utility check. Concrete mysteriously appeared in my septic lines. And then she made her fatal mistake. She tried to manufacture psychiatric records. Nina called, practically buzzing through the phone. Ethan, Madeline just offered my editor exclusive access to your VA mental health files, she said. Files that don't exist. Fabricating federal medical records to smear a veteran? That is an HOA drama. That's prison time. Dana's eyes lit up. We now had property fraud, easement violations, environmental crimes, civil rights violations, and federal document fabrication. So we went over her head. With Dana, Dr. Rivers, Nina, and a small army of veterans and victims we'd gathered at Liberty Veterans Hall, we drafted simultaneous complaints to the VA Inspector General, the Environmental Protection Agency, and yes, the FBI. At the same time, I sent certified letters to the mansion families, rent demands, $2,000 per day for occupying my land, while also offering them a path out if they joined our case against Madeline. They signed on, not because they loved me, but because they finally understood she'd risked their children's homes to feed her empire. Madeline's last big play was straight out of a bad crime show. One morning I woke up to sirens and the smell of smoke. Her HOA office, the converted garage full of files and secrets, was an inferno. On live TV, in designer pajamas and flawless mascara, she sobbed to reporters that I'd been stalking her, that I'd finally snapped and torched her office. He's dangerous, she cried. He needs to be stopped. Problem is, at that exact time I was at Riverside Veterans Medical Center, 60 miles away, going through my scheduled annual checkup, signed in and out by federal staff, on cameras, with paperwork down to the minute. When the FBI showed up expecting a terrorist, Agent Lauren Pierce instead found a workshop covered in maps, timelines, bank statements, recordings, and handwritten logs from Mrs. Briggs. She spent an hour reading, then looked at me and said, "Mr. Cole, this doesn't look like the work of a criminal. It looks like the case file of a victim who's done half our job." Forensics found accelerant residue on Madeline's hands, her prints on a gas can planted behind my shed, camera footage of her car cruising my street at 3 a.m. Owen Kerr, facing 20-year conspiracy counts, folded first, handing over forged permits, fake inspection reports, and proof of 12 different reclaimed properties. Graham Delaney followed, trading testimony for his own skin. The Army Corps of Engineers and environmental regulators moved fast, slapping Madeline's company with $4.2 million in fines and ordering all 3 mansions shut down and demolished to restore the underground stream. When the annual Silver Ridge Estates HOA meeting came around, it didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a verdict. Local cameras lined the back wall, Nina live streaming from the corner, Agent Pierce standing quietly near the exit like judgment in a navy blazer. I walked in with Dana, Mrs. Briggs, Rick, Jason, and the mansion families, not as the crazy vet in the rumor mill, but as the guy with the receipts. They brought Madeline in wearing county orange, wrists cuffed, makeup gone, the queen of Silver Ridge reduced to another defendant on borrowed time. The new board president, a nervous engineer who'd never wanted this job, opened with some careful words about irregularities. I took the mic and cut through the soft language. "Let's skip irregularities," I said. "Call it what it is. Theft." On the projector, Dana walked everyone through it. My grandfather's deed, the easement violations, the veteran covenant, the environmental maps, the financial trails from Kerr's Signature Realty into shell accounts. Mrs. Briggs read from her notebooks, voice trembling but clear, describing how Arthur had suspected this kind of thing decades ago and asked her to keep watch. Jason stood with his twin daughters and said, "We bought a dream. She sold us stolen land." Then Agent Pierce stepped up, badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. She listed the charges: mail fraud, conspiracy, environmental crimes, witness tampering, fabrication of federal medical records, civil rights violations against veterans. 47 counts. Potentially decades in prison. You could feel the room shift as people realized the woman they'd trusted to guard property values had been using that power to strip generational wealth from the very neighbors who'd served their country. Months later, in federal court, Judge Catherine Doyle sentenced Madeline Kerr to 4 years in prison and $1.8 million in restitution she'll never truly pay. Owen got 2 years and a lifetime ban from inspection work. Graham lost his license and most of his assets. The mansions came down, brick by brick, until my land was a meadow again, the underground stream running clear for the first time in decades. My settlement, $2.1 million for property violations, environmental damage, and civil rights claims, could have been a ticket to vanish somewhere quiet. But that's not what Arthur raised me for, and not what Lena would have wanted. With Mrs. Briggs, we launched the Valor Homestead Defense Fund, aimed at helping veterans fight HOAs and corrupt officials. We funded the Ethan and Lena Cole Scholarship Fund at Northbridge Community College, giving kids from military families a shot at degrees without drowning in debt. Dana expanded into the Frontline Property Justice Center, taking cases from veterans in half a dozen states. On my land, where those mansions once stood, Dr. Claire Rivers helped design a native sanctuary and veterans memorial garden. Wildflowers for Lena, native trees for each conflict, a granite stone for those still fighting invisible battles at home. Jason's family now rents a properly surveyed house from me at a fair rate, his daughter's laughter carrying across the grass where bulldozers once roared. Somewhere along the way, in late nights over maps and soil reports, Claire and I stopped being just allies and started planning a wedding under Arthur's oak tree, right where Lena asked me to keep living after she was gone. The house that used to echo with grief now smells like coffee and sawdust and home. My grandfather's Purple Heart sits on the mantel beside Lena's favorite photo, watching over a neighborhood that finally understands what community is supposed to mean. So here's the question I keep coming back to, and the one I want to leave with you. When an HOA, or any petty little kingdom of paperwork and power, decides it can steal from the people who bled for the land, what's the right response? Walk away to protect your peace, or stand your ground and burn their whole corrupt system down with the truth?